Yo, what is going on, guys? Today I'm going to teach you how to accept popular payment methods from around the globe using a very secure embeddable UI component from the guys over at Stripe. We're going to be doing this inside of a Next.js app, and I'm going to teach you even how to go ahead and test it using localhost. So that way you can go ahead and test in things like Apple Pay, Google Pay, all that good stuff. Let's dive straight in. So here we have a beautiful demo of the application that we're going to be building. I'm going to go ahead and refresh, and you can see it's got a nice little loading animator. Let's click on Google Pay. But before we do, it's also worth mentioning we have got nice validation from the Stripe elements. But I'm going to go ahead and test out Google Pay. So let's click on Google Pay, click on Pay. And as you can see, we get a nice little pop-up, and then we can go ahead and pay. Now, it will be a test environment, so we will not get charged. But if everything goes to plan, we will then get redirected to a beautiful confirmation page. So you're going to learn how to do all of this. We've got the card, we've got Google Pay. And if you support Apple Pay, for example, if I was on Safari right now, we would go ahead and see Apple Pay and a bunch of other popular providers. We can take a look at the Stripe documentation. We can see the Stripe payment element. And here you can see a bunch of examples of the different types of payments that you can go ahead and accept. So we're going to go ahead and build this very, very shortly. Now, it's worth mentioning that when you develop in localhost, you aren't actually serving the app over something called HTTPS. This means that it's hard to test popular payment methods such as Google and Apple Pay. So I'm going to show you how you can go ahead and ensure that you can test all of the different payment types on your localhost over HTTPS. I'm going to break it down super simple. We're going to build today's app in 5 steps. Step 1, we're going to create a Next.js app. Step 2, we're going to add Stripe payment elements so that users can select which option they want to check out with. Step 3, we're going to create an API route handler in Next.js 14, and this is going to allow us to securely process the payment. Step 4, we're going to redirect the user to the success page if all goes perfectly. And step 5, I'm going to show you how you can test things like Google Pay and Apple Pay on localhost. These both require HTTPS, but we have a neat little solution for you. So step 1, we're going to go ahead and start up a new app with the latest version. We're going to click yes to all of the defaults. And once that's done, we're going to CD into the folder. So we're going to CD into our Stripe folder right now. Then we're going to go ahead and hit code dot. This will pull up our VS Code with everything that we need inside of it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on app, page.tsx, and this is the starting point for our app. To run our app, we simply press Command J, go to the output, go ahead and close these two. And in the terminal, we simply type in npm run dev. And this will spin up our app on localhost 3000. If you did everything right, you'll see a starter template on the side of the screen. Now, what I want you to do is go ahead and delete everything inside of the main. Go ahead and remove the default styling, remove the image import, and then head over to layout. And we're just going to do a bit of cleanup here. So that way we've got a very clean slate. Now, remember, all of today's code is actually in the GitHub repository for free, and it will be linked down below in the description, so you can go ahead and use that to follow along if you get stuck. So this is our starting point, a nice blank canvas. The final finishing touch is inside of our globals.css. We're going to remove all of the default styling except for the Tailwind classes, because we're going to use some of that in today's lesson. Now, first up, we need to go ahead and install Stripe payment elements into our app. So you can go ahead and click on Quick Start. They've got a nice little guide here. However, their guide does show you for the pages directory. So your boys come through and made this a lot simpler for you by going ahead and building an entire tutorial in using the app directory. So I've got you covered. So before we get started, we actually need to install some dependencies into our project. So Control C to cut off the terminal. And I'm simply going to install 3 different packages from Stripe. Once that's done, we can go ahead and run our app once again by using npm run dev. Now, we're going to have to use a few client libraries here. So we're going to convert this component into a client component inside of Next.js. Then we're going to need a couple of dependencies. So you can see we haven't got 2 of them. We need to create these, but the elements and load Stripe we just installed. So those should be just fine. We then need to load Stripe into our application. So we're going to go ahead and call the load Stripe with our environment variable. Now, we haven't actually set this. So I'm going to show you how you can set this right now. Simply go over to your package.json, so you're at the top level, create a new file and call it .env.local. Inside of here, we're going to have 2 environment variables to start with. They're going to be the next public Stripe public key, and then we're going to have our Stripe secret key. Now, Anything that has next public means that it will be visible on the client. So make sure you are sure that you do not mind exposing this key publicly, okay? So we get this from the Stripe dashboard. Let's go ahead and take a look at where we can grab that right now. So to get started, head over to stripe.com and simply click on the dashboard. You'll be prompted to log in, set up an account. Once you've done that, you'll land on a page similar to this. So on the top right-hand side, you'll see the For Developers section. What I want you to do is simply click on the publishable key and then head over back to your app, and then I want you to go ahead and paste it. The same applies for your secret key. Now you want to keep this really private. However, I'm going to invalidate this after this tutorial, so I will show you. In this case, we're going to save it like so. Now we have the two environment variables that we need. So heading back over to page.tsx, I'm going to add a defensive programming check to make sure that the next public Stripe public key is always defined. Otherwise, it will throw an error. Then we're going to have a simple bit of styling from Tailwind CSS like so. We're going to specify the amount that we want to transfer to the user. So in this case, if we want to send the user $49.99, then we're simply going to make a variable amount and pop it here. I'm going to have a nice little header saying Sunny has requested an amount. Now, obviously, I've kept this static because it's a demo, but you can feel free to go ahead and customize this as you wish or make it dynamic and support several users. So far we've got the beginning of our app. As you can see, looks pretty smooth. But now we need to implement the Stripe payment elements. So heading back over, we want to go ahead and put this inside of our app. Before we carry on, guys, it's worth mentioning that these videos take a ton of energy to produce for absolutely free. So all I ask is that you smash the thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button before we carry on. Let's go ahead and jump back in. So next up, we need to go ahead and pull the Stripe Elements component inside of our app. So let's do that right now by doing the following. We simply pop in the elements like so, and this will be a higher order component. And then we're going to put our checkout page beneath it. Now our checkout page will sit something like this, right? So we've got our checkout page, which obviously we have not created, so it's going to freak out. But we also need to pass in an options configuration for our elements. Now, the options basically specify how we want it to look, the amount that we're going to charge, the currency, and the type and mode of payment. So let's go ahead and pop that in right now. You can feel free to go ahead and mess around with this yourself. You can see payment, setup, subscription. We're just doing a single payment for the time being. Now, it's worth mentioning in Stripe, whenever we pass an amount, for example, $49.99, we actually need to pass it in the sub currency. So if we're talking about dollars, then it would be the sub currency, which is actually in cents. This is why I've created a convert to subcurrency function, which we're actually going to go ahead and create right now. So hit package.json to go to the top level, create a new folder called lib, and inside of there, we're going to create a file called convert to subcurrency.ts. Now, this is a very simple function. It's essentially just going to take an amount, which is the number, and then the factor by default is going to be 100, because if we have dollar to get to cent, we simply times the amount by the factor, in this case 100. Okay, and then we simply return that number. So let's go ahead and save that, and we can use this now inside of our app. Next up, we need to create the checkout page. So I'm going to create a nice folder for this. So at the top level, package.json, components, and I'm going to call it the checkout page.tsx. So our checkout page is simply going to be a functional component which takes a prop, which is amount, and the amount is simply going to be a number. This is also going to be a client component, so we're going to go ahead and specify at the top. This tells Next.js we want it to only render on the client, and then I'm going to pull a couple of dependencies that we're going to need to get things set up. Next, I'm going to prepare some of the data that I'm going to need. So we're going to get Stripe, the elements, and this is only possible because we've actually wrapped our checkout page in the higher order component over here. And then we simply have 3 pieces of state, which we're going to use to go ahead and handle different parts of the interaction when the user is selecting their payment method and carrying out the process to pay. So to get this error disappearing, we're going to go ahead and export default checkout page, and then we should see no more errors. If you got to this part, well done. Next up, in order to process a payment like so, we have to go ahead and create something called a payment intent. Now, the way this works is when it loads, we need something called a client secret. So the way that we're going to do this is that when this loads, we're going to go ahead and, depending on which we've selected, every time we select something, we need to generate a new client secret. And this client secret is responsible for processing the payment for the method that we've selected. So in order to do this, we actually need to create something called a route handler. So we're actually going to be creating our own API. So heading into the app folder, all I need you to do is simply go ahead and create a folder called API. And inside of this folder, we're going to create a create payment intent endpoint. Now inside of here, we're going to go ahead and create a route.ts file. Now, This is using the Next.js 14 syntax. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and prep it for a post request. So this is going to be a API endpoint, which is only going to accept post requests. Then we're going to go ahead and actually set up our Stripe. So in this case, we're going to call Stripe from our dependency, and we're going to invoke it with the Stripe secret key. But this is okay because this is all going to happen only on the server, so we can actually use this value. Otherwise, this would not be a safe thing to do if we were on the client. Next, we're going to have a try catch block, and then we're going to assume that the user passes an amount inside of the post body. So this is how we go ahead and get the amount inside of a route handler. So next step, we need to tell Stripe that we're about to make a payment to the Stripe account. So we go ahead and create something called a payment intent by saying stripe.paymentintents.create. We pass in the amount, and again, this is going to be the sub currency that we pass through from the client. The currency will be in USD, and there's this lovely new option here called automatic payment methods. And this will actually automatically detect, based on the user's browser and setup, which payment methods they have available. Now, once that's done, we simply need to send back something called the client secret. Then we simply need to go ahead and return the response, which is the client secret. Now, if any error occurred, we can simply handle it by doing the following. We're just going to log out the error and simply return an internal server error, and we're going to console error it onto the dashboard. So that way we can go ahead and investigate if anything went wrong at any time. So this is our endpoint created. Now heading back over to our checkout page. Remember what I said, every time this loads, so each time the checkout page mounts and we select a different option, we need it to generate a client secret based on that option. So let's go ahead and do that right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have a use effect. Now a use effect actually runs each time the component changes unless we simply pop these empty dependency arrays in. This means it will only run the first time that it mounts. However, I want it to change if the amount that we pass through to the checkout page changes as well. We're then going to make a fetch call to our API endpoint that we just created. This is going to be a post request as we just set up. We are going to be sending some JSON information, so we have to set the correct headers. And in the body, we're going to stringify the amount, and we're going to use our convert to subcurrency function to go ahead and convert our amount, which is $49.99 at the moment, to the subcurrency, which is cents. And this will go ahead and send it over to the create payment intent as we intended. Now, once this is done, we can go ahead and pass the information by doing then.res.json, and then we can go ahead and get the data, which is the client secret, out of it, and we can actually set our client state to the value here, so that way we can use it inside of our checkout page itself. So this is perfect. Every time the amount changes, we will then go ahead and generate a new client secret. This allows us to actually process the payment. Now the next step, let's go ahead and see something on the screen. So I'm going to have a form, a very simple form, and inside of this, we're simply going to have a button which will simply say something like pay the amount, okay? But the interesting part is inside of this form, we're going to go ahead and pop in the following. We're going to say if there is a client secret present, we're going to render out the payment element from the Stripe library. So let's go ahead and click OK. And as you can see, just like that, we have a beautiful payment form from Stripe. But you'll notice we don't get Google Pay, and that's because we're serving this page over localhost 3000, which is not secure. That means it's being served over something called HTTP and not HTTPS, which means we can't do things like Google Pay and Apple Pay, but we'll fix that later on. We're going to add a little bit of styling to make things a little bit visible, and we're going to set ourselves up so when we populate this error message, we can go ahead and see it populated underneath between the point where we click the button to pay and between the payment element here. Now, when the user submits this form, we're going to go ahead and submit a handle submit function. So let's write that function right now. So we're going to create the signature like so. We've got our handle submit function. It is an async function and it has an event argument. Now, if you're wondering how to get this, here's a neat little trick for you. So if you simply do an arrow function here, what you'll see is you actually get a nice little hint here at the type. So I actually use this trick all the time. And if we go ahead and remove that, you can see you get perfect type definitions every time. I teach that inside Zero to Full Stack Hero all the time. So we're going to do a couple of checks. We're actually going to prevent the default behavior so it doesn't submit and refresh the page. We're going to set the loading variable to true, so that way we can interact with a couple of the elements on the page while we're handling the payment. We're then going to do a defensive programming block, so that way if Stripe or element hasn't loaded yet, we're going to return. Then we're going to check for any validation errors. So if we do elements.submit, we will get a submit error if there was anything wrong with the information that we submitted. And I can go ahead and catch this by saying if submit error, set the error message to whatever the message comes back as, and set the loading indicator to false. And then we return from the function so we don't carry on with the payment processing. I'm going to add a little bit of styling to the button so it's visible, so that looks a lot better. I'm also going to disable the button if there is no stripe or if it's loading at any point. And then this pay button could be a little bit nicer. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to say if it's not loading, then it will say pay the amount that's owed, or it will say processing if it's in the process of loading. It's also worth mentioning we've got some disabled styling here, which is going to be impacted by if this is true. So it will go ahead and flash a nice little animation. Now, if there was no validation errors, for example, if I hit enter here, you can see these are the validation errors that I'm talking about. If we went ahead and put in the correct details, I want to do something called confirm payment. So we basically told Stripe to prepare a payment for us. So that way, when the user goes ahead and confirms it, it will go ahead and charge their card accordingly. So how do we do that? We simply go ahead and type in await Stripe confirm payment, and we pass in the elements themselves, the client secret that I told you about earlier, and the confirm params basically essentially say if everything went to plan, we can go ahead and redirect the user to the following URL. Now, just for this demo, I've gone ahead and put a hard URL here. However, you can make this dynamic based on if you've deployed to the cell, the URL, and so forth. But we're just sending in the amount as well as a query parameter. Now, if there was an error, this variable here will go ahead and populate itself. So we can go ahead and check if that error is present, and then we can set an error message. Else it would have redirected the user at this point, but I've left it in here just to help you guys out. And finally, I want to set the loading to false. Now this looks great. If we refresh the page, you can see it takes a second and then it will populate into the payment form. So how do I actually go ahead and address the loading point? Well, before this return statement, I can simply say if there is no client secret or no stripe or no elements, then yes, it will be loading. However, I've done something a little bit nicer, and the code is in the description if you want it. We're going to simply render this spinner. This is simply a Tailwind CSS hacked bit of code together to go ahead and form a nice little spinner. So I'll show you the output. And if any of these things are, true, which essentially means it's loading, then we get this nice little spinner so the user knows that, okay, I need to wait for something for a second. Now, once we've done that, we can go ahead and check that everything is in order. So this should be all good. Sometimes you just need to go ahead and save the file, and everything seems great. So when you're testing with Stripe, we can go ahead and use the following number for a test card. We can say 42424242424242. And then the expiry date, you can put any value, and the CVV date, you can go ahead and put another value as well. So in this case, it's just put 28, for example. Any country, it does not matter. And we can click pay, and you can see processing is disabled. And then that's actually a great sign because it routed me to payment success, which means that the payment was successfully carried out. So this was actually great, and it will be visible in the Stripe dashboard. So if we go into the payments tab, we can see that we have one successful payment. Click onto that, and we then can see we have our payment details as follows. So this is a perfect payment that's gone through, and everything seems great. So next up, to fix this little 404 error, we can go ahead and create a final page, which is very, very simple. All we're going to do is go ahead and type in a payment success page. So we're going to do payment success, and inside of here, we're going to go ahead and do page.tsx. Now, this has got a very simple bit of code inside. All we need to do is go ahead and have the following. It simply already gets populated with some props, and inside of those props, we have something called the search params, which has actually got the query parameters. So as I mentioned earlier, when we redirected the user to the success URL, we actually populated the amount here. And this is simply a nice little bit of styling, which just says, thank you, you successfully sent $49.99. So now, if you can see, everything works flawlessly and just as we expected. So there we have it, guys. That's how easy it is to go ahead and get your payments up and running with Stripe. However, hold your horses. We need to go ahead and test our app to make sure that it works with Google Pay and Apple Pay. But on localhost, we serve our app over HTTP. This means that it does not allow for services like Google or Apple to go ahead and send over payment requests. So we have a bit of a problem here. So how can we fix that? So to make this work, HTTPS is a requirement, which, as I mentioned, default localhost doesn't work with. This is where lcl.host saves the day. It's the easiest and most functional way, bear in mind I said functional way, to set up HTTPS in your local environment. It's very simple and it works with just 2 commands. Let's see how it works ourselves. So if we head over to lcl.host, we'll come to this, and it's a free tool from Anchor, so you can feel free to use it yourself. And all you need to do is run the first command, brew install as follows. So in this case, if you haven't got this, simply go ahead and install Homebrew, or you can download it and install it from the source here. But we're going to go ahead and copy that. I've already done this command, so I don't need to run this. Once you have this, you'll actually have the anchor CLI command. So inside of our project, we're going to go ahead and do that right now. So heading back over to our project, Command J to pull up our terminal. Now what I'm going to do is, as you can see, just to prove a point here, at the top, this is not secure. Okay, so obviously we're not going to get Google Pay or anything like that coming through. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and type in anchor LCL. Now, once this is done, it will probably prompt you to go ahead and log in first. We've already done that, so we just simply need to select which application server type. Ours is Next.js. We can hit enter. I'm going to keep the default application name, and then we have to select a domain name. So I'm going to keep it the default as well that it's given us. Now what it will do is it will create us a certificate for our local environment. So it says which certificate management method. We're going to type in the recommended, which is the anchor style. And then we're going to go ahead and hit enter to open this nice little URL that they've given us. So this should go ahead and give us our own custom documentation. I really like this from Anchor as well, because it gives us all of the steps in a perfect setup. So it's really, really easy to go ahead and get set up with this. And you can go ahead and type in Next.js and they give you all of the code that you actually need. So let's do this right now. It's very, very simple. In our code base, what we're going to do is I'm simply going to go ahead and install this package into our app. So we're going to go ahead and install the package. So npm anchor pki. And then we have the server config. So I'm going to copy our server config, head over to our next config mjs. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to replace everything inside of here with this configuration instead. And this will actually make sure that we load up the certificates when we get started. So that way we can run our local host and forward it to an HTTPS server, right? So in this case, we've got our server environment configuration. So we need to actually get our new environment variables as well. So heading back over to our environment file. So if we jump back over to the environment file, we currently have the Next public secret and Stripe public secret. We simply just need to click on generate new environment variables, copy these and paste them over. Now you don't actually need the exports that they actually pop in. So you can go ahead and get rid of those. But just like that, we've actually got the setup done. So it was so simple and so quick to get up and running. It's actually crazy. So now no extra steps are needed. All we need to do is head back over and we can simply run npm run dev in our terminal. And what we should see now is we get these two new domains here. So the only difference is that one is localhost, one is lcl.host, but they're forwarding to our local ports, right? So if I click on this link, what we will see is the web page will open up, but this time it will be a secure web page served over HTTPS. And as you can see, we have certificates that are issued locally. Now, the cool part is that one, this is being secured over an HTTPS connection, which is amazing. And as you can see, guys, we have Google Pay. So now we can test on our local host, and you can be rest assured that this is definitely localhost. And I can prove it by heading over to our page and simply popping in a little bit of a change. Let's go ahead and say, let's just do 1099 instead. Right, and simply hit save, and you can see the hot reloading and everything works just perfectly. Let's go ahead and show you right now a live demo. So if I go over to Google Pay and I simply click on pay, boom, just like that, we see our Google Pay pops up, and then we can go ahead and actually click the payment button. And again, it will process the payment. And if it's successful, boom, you see, there you go. So this is an amazing tool that we can go ahead and use to test out HTTPS features in our environment. Now, besides testing things like Apple Pay and Google Pay, why should you care about running HTTPS in your local environment? Well, here's a couple of reasons why you should actually care about this. Firstly, it mimics your production environment to your dev environment by adding HTTPS locally. This means that you don't get any scary surprises when you go to deploy. It will keep things more or less consistent. Secondly, there could be potential cause errors that will not be seen on localhost, but they will be seen when we end up using HTTPS. We have HTTP 2 support, so you can test performance and behavior specific to HTTP 2. Another important one is secure cookies. Now, cookies can behave differently when they're on HTTPS as they can when they're on the local host. So this is something that you want to go ahead and check with. And of course, as we saw right now, OAuth and secure endpoints. So services like Facebook OAuth require HTTPS, even even Google Pay and Apple Pay, and also localhost apps and marketplaces. So tools like Heroku, Slack, and AWS often require HTTPS for a lot of their services. Finally, it's actually required for some of the dev tools. So when you go into production environments, you're going to need HTTPS on your local host to go ahead and get things running as correctly as possible. But I know what you're thinking. Sunny, why are you not just using the Next Experimental Flag or something like ngrok? So here's a nice little breakdown as to why I would recommend lcl.host over other options such as ngrok or the Next.js Experimental Flag. Let's begin with why it's better than the Next.js Experimental Flag. Well, firstly, it works with per project subdomains. This means that any kind of secure cookies that you may have had conflicting issues with before, you will no longer get those by using lcl.host instead. Secondly, it works seamlessly in containers. So if you're doing any kind of containerization, this is definitely going to be important for you. And finally, it actually works for Vite apps, Python, Go, JavaScript. So this is obviously a clear win against the Next.js Experimental Flag, which only works for Next.js. Okay, but what about ngrok? Well, firstly, lcl.host doesn't actually require an internet connection once set up. ngrok works quite different in the sense that it actually forwards to a different HTTPS port. So if you don't want that traffic being sent over the internet, that's another thing to go ahead and remind yourself of. So there's no separate tunneling process involved. It's all handled locally. So you can actually work offline completely to go ahead and test out what you need. And it's got a greater flexibility with multiple domains with a much more generous free tier than ngrok. So in summary, the dev and production parity remains the same. So in that case, whether you're in development and production, you can keep the variables as similar as possible, especially when you're trying to test a lot of features that require HTTPS. So service workers, progressive web apps, WebRTC, and a bunch more. And you don't have to go ahead and forward the traffic for your site over the internet, for example, if you're using ngrok. So again, something to be considerate of when you're working in production environments. So to go ahead and get started, simply check out the first link in the description. It's super simple, 2 commands, and it takes less than 3 minutes. So there you have it, guys. You can now add in Stripe payments into any of your existing Next.js apps. This will work with the app router, so Next.js 13 upwards, and the existing documentation can be used for anything below that version. So this is future-proof tutorial. Do not worry, guys. So now you can go ahead and support several different payment providers with ease inside of your Next app. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos just like this, guys. As always, it's your boy Sunny, aka Papa React, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.